All right. Good morning. Thank you for being here. And we're waiting for Sue Mallory, who is unavailable because of a power outage at her home. Yeah, and apparently she was here up till the start time, and then the only message you have is power outage. So we're going to go ahead and introduce her, even though. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. Okay, so let's begin with prayer. We're grateful, God, for all your gifts and for the joy that we have in serving you. And we thank you for our sister Sue, how you have used her to challenge and stretch and excite so many people for your ministry. Bless her, and we pray that you help us with this connection, that we might be able to talk with her and see her this morning. Right now, as we here in Tokyo think about your call on our lives, we pray your blessing and your direction as we seek to serve you and honor you and serve you with joy in this place that is your church, your house, and our home. We pray this for your glory in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, I'm just going to say a quick word about Sue. Sue is a person who was a member at Brentwood Presbyterian Church. I knew her pastor first, Charles Shields, and he was an inspiring guy, and we worked together on some projects. And then I met her, and it turned out that she had some people in her church who, the son of the couple was the son of some people in the church where I was a pastor, the Kobata family. And so the Kobatas were also affected by the ministry of Sue Mallory, and I heard about her, and I got to know her, and I was so inspired. Even before she wrote the book, I was hearing these inspiring stories and really encouraged and challenged in our ministry. And then the book came out, and then she became really popular. So here she comes. And as Sue shows up, one of the things that has been so fun to share this book with our stewardship team is to see Alan get so invigorated about lay ministry. He has he's become on fire for this, and I'm so thrilled. And so Alan is going to be interviewing Sue, basically, because Alan's just full of wonderful questions. So Alan, I'm going to turn it to you.
Okay, maybe Jonathan, let's see if we can hear. Sue, can you hear us? This is how we started connecting with her before, and she just has to push the button and we'll see her. So I think we're very close.
We are close.
So I'll start. Yeah, it's more. We're so close. Thank you, Jonathan. So as Pastor Steve mentioned, the stewardship team, part of what we do is we try to find ways to educate our church on stewardship. And Pastor Steve, we were looking at a number of books, and Pastor Steve mentioned The Equipping Church, and then he mentioned he knew the author. And of course, that piqued our interest. And so long story short, I've read the book 3 times. I read earlier in the year, and then in the summer making notes, and then yesterday just to refresh my memory. And we're not going to cover everything. There's no way. There's so many good nuggets, so many good pieces of information in the book, I think. So what our hope is, we want you to meet Sue. She's a great storyteller. And we've picked a few parts of the book that have resonated with us within the stewardship team. And we've had some sessions with her, Pastor Steve and I, during the week. And we just want to give you a glimpse. And maybe it'll pique your interest. And then maybe we can see how individually we can learn and grow, and maybe as TUC, as a church. So we're very excited when she can join us to have Sue here.
If you don't mind, I'm going to see if I can talk to her real quick.
Okay.
Hello, Sue. Are you with us? She is muted, so we can't hear you. There you go. You unmuted yourself.
Now
Oh, we can hear you now.
Yay.
Sweet.
can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Close.
There you are. Yay.
Oh, yay. Lord have mercy.
That's a way to make an entrance.
Don't you love technology?
So Pastor Steve opened with prayer, and then he said a bit about how he got to know you and how he he introduced us to you through the stewardship team and how we're here. And I mentioned there's so much in the book. We're not going to get to cover everything, but we're hoping that people can meet you and we can hear a bit about some of the stories. Like, they are inspirational, they are encouraging, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, time permitting, at the end. So as you're listening, pretty soon Byron and Jesper will come with paper and pens, and you can write your questions. Where is it? Oh, they're all on the tables. Okay, feel free to write down questions, and if we don't get time to finish everything today, we can offline. We can ask her. I think we've.
We'll come again.
Yeah, or that even too. Great.
Come again.
So why don't we? Do you want to just jump right in, or okay? We're going to jump right in. So for those who haven't read the book, maybe Sue, if you can just let us know what prompted you to write the book in the first place. Back when you wrote it, it wasn't straightforward, I recall. And who is it written for, and just generally what it's about?
I never intended to write a book. It came about after I'd been in ministry a full 15 years, and so many people were asking me for some of the things I was talking about in training or in going to their churches or in seminars. And finally, they kept asking me for a book, and I said, I don't have a book. And so that's what I didn't plant the seed. The people that I was serving planted the seed, and that's how it came about.
Okay. And just in case, what is the main message you'd like people to take away?
The main message about the book and about our time together is about the Equipping Church is not some new fad. It's a biblical mandate on how we do and be ministry. It's a partnership in ministry, pastors and people. It's a way to make sure nobody falls through the cracks. It's a way to get to know who's in our congregation, what the needs are, what the gifts are. And it's the priesthood of all believers, which calls us all to be ministers. Now, I confess to you, when I first started, I didn't know what that meant. But the more I studied the scriptures and recognized throughout the New Testament, throughout all the gifts passages, it calls us to use those gifts. They're all action verbs. And so the Equipping Church is about how do we do that and the impact that happens to people when we do. It's about transformation of people's lives, of your congregation, and oftentimes in your community. So that's kind of the overarching statement about what the Equipping Church means. Does that help?
Yes. I think one of the parts, like the right towards the beginning of the book, there's a story about the difference between someone having, theological training or and someone who doesn't. And can you explain a bit about, because many of us here aren't pastors. We haven't gone to theological seminary to study, but how that interplays in terms of how you wrote that I guess you had.
Well, if
realization.
I backtrack, Alan, I said no to a lot of things in ministry early on because I didn't think I was qualified.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go to seminary. I wasn't steeped in the knowledge of the scriptures. And so I didn't feel I was qualified. And I had a pastor, Charles Shields, who believed that people's gifts is what qualified them for ministry. He saw gifts in me that I didn't know I had. And so he kept encouraging me to serve in all different ways. And an incident happened in my life where I was injured and I was helpless in terms of being able to care for my family. I have 3 children. And at the time they were 2, 4, and 6, and I couldn't manage. And the church stepped in a way that I had never encountered before. People brought meals. They drove my kids to youth groups. They drove every day my little daughter when they had a little Bible school. And I, to this day, remember every person who showed up at my house and every meal that was brought to us. And how many in your congregation, as in mine, have the attitude that I just brought a meal? I didn't really do anything. And I'm here to tell you, having been on the receiving end of care, not once, not twice, but 8 times from 8 surgeries, that you saved my life. You saved my husband's life and my children's life. And the message to my children at first, they were saying, Mommy, why are these people bringing food? I was able to help them understand the power of the church, and it transformed all of our lives. So that was one big transformation for my family. And I hope you understand that I realized the giftedness of the people that were bringing things to me.
Mm.
After I recovered, my pastor knew I was really thankful for the church and all the service I received. And I wanted to find a way to give back. I wanted to be able to do something I could do. He had a vision for the equipping church. He had a vision. He had the theology behind it. And he thought if we had a person to come alongside the pastor who had different gifts than he had, that we could work together as a team and find ways to really organize the church in a way that we could discover people and meet people and help them see their gifts and do training, et cetera, et cetera. And he offered me this job. And I said, I can't do that job. I don't have the qualifications. He said, Sue, you have the gifts for it. You don't trust that, but you do. So he showed me the job description. Is there anything on there you can't do? I said, well, I don't know how to do a computer. However, I'm willing to find people that can, because the whole idea was to multiply people involved in ministry. And so I called a man whose name was Bruce Johnson. I knew him from prior years when I used to sing in the choir. And I drove him home every week from choir because he was legally blind. But his job, his profession, was teaching computers to the handicapped. And I said, here I am, I'm handicapped. I don't even know how to turn it on. And I asked if he would teach me, but then would he help? We knew we needed to have some kind of database, and I didn't even know what that looked like. Bruce, God love him, took over. He built a team with the people in the church that he knew had the skills they needed, and they built a database. Now, this was in 1985, so there wasn't such a thing available to the church at the time. But here's a man who some people dismiss as can't do ministry. And he built a database for the church, and it lasted us the first 10 years of that ministry. So sometimes we overlook these high capacity people because they don't look like high capacity people. But Bruce was the beginning of my success in that ministry. And it just flowed out from there by building more and more teams in more and more of the areas that we needed. But that was a huge moment for me. And one of the things that we did build to come alongside the pastors was a care team so that the pastors didn't have to do all the care. I got involved in that, A, because I loved the ministry, and B, I wanted to learn how to train it because it was an extensive training program. One of the people on the receiving end, a man by the name of Joe, who had AIDS, and he'd come to the church late stage in AIDS, and he really wanted to be a member of a church when he died. His family was from Ohio. And so he signed up for the new member class. I met him on the patio. He signed up for the new member class, but he didn't show up. So I called him the next day and said, Joe, is there anything wrong? He said, I want to do this so badly, but I don't have the energy to come out starting at 4 o'clock in the daytime. I went to our session and said, could I take the class to him? Because I co-taught it with Charles. And they said yes. And so day in and day out for the next 6 days, I gave him all the materials, all the things that we did at the church, service things that we did, but also the scripture behind all the stuff we were doing. We became deep and wonderful friends. But it was a short friendship because he was a dying man. I got a telephone call one afternoon and said, and his friends, one of his friends knew me and called, said, Sue, can you come? I think Ned is dying now. So I got in this is before cell phones. So I got in my car and I drove there as fast as I could. And I called the church and said, get a pastor over there as quickly as you can. And I sat with Ned, I prayed with Ned. I was awed by his friends gathered around him. It was a beautiful, loving scene. And the phone kept ringing, and I kept thinking, okay, the pastor's coming. He got my message. He's coming. And he never came. And so I needed to leave because my mother was also dying at the time, and I needed to get to the hospital. And so I said to Ned, I want to pray with you again. And we had talked about the transition of dying. And I said, it's time, Ned, and you're prepared for this. And so we had this really beautiful conversation. And I went to the hospital to be with my mother. I got home, I called my pastor, and we had what I could define as a come to Jesus conversation. And those conversations meant, I have something to talk to you about. I am not happy, and you need to listen to me. And I went on and on about where was the church? We have two pastors. I called and called. Where were they? He said, are you done? And I said, I took it. Yes. And because I had never pushed back on him like that, but I was so emotional about it. He said, Sue, I called, and whoever answered the phone said, there's no need to come. The minister is here. And I was dumbfounded. But Chuck said, you have to understand, you are a minister. It isn't just me. We are all ministers. And that was the beginning of my understanding of the ministry of the laity. It was one of the best lessons I ever learned. And I take from that more ministry is caught than taught. You find people in the act of doing something special for the church, for a person in service, and remind them that it's ministry.
That's the story that resonated with me. You're thinking that someone else's role to be with Joe, and then in fact it was you, and that's I really like that story.
And the blessing was mine. I want
Right.
people to be clear.
Right. It's kind of similar. We just finished stewardship season, or in the midst, I guess you could say. Some people are still filling out their forms, but one aspect of the book I appreciate is that not everyone is in a position to serve, right? There's different seasons in our lives. And one quote from the book I like is, there are times when we as Christians need to carry the stretcher. There are other times when we need to walk alongside the stretcher. And whether we like it or not, there are times when we need to be on the stretcher, being carried by others. You talked about your personal story, but are there other stories you can share about others that you've touched?
There are many, and one I know that you care deeply. I have a friend, Calvi Houston, who was the director of lay ministries at Crystal Cathedral, and she was always meeting new people and eager to see them, and she'd always follow up personally with a phone call. And when she called, it was a young family, and when she called, they were off-putting. They didn't respond to her call. Not a good time. We're interested in your church, but not now. And so there were mixed messages. So Calvi went to his office and said, we don't want to overwhelm you as a church. We would love to have you be part of our church family. Is there anything we can do for you? And the man broke down and cried. And Calvi learned that their family was going through a crisis, a terrible crisis with a child. He said, I can. She said, how can we serve you? He was going to have a surgery. It wasn't going to be in Orange County where they lived. Calvi put the wheels into motion, and she found people to drive them to the airport. She called to the city where the surgery was going to be and found church members there to come alongside them. When he came home, even before they reconnected to the church and Calvi visited with him, he said, for the first time in my life, I felt I belonged to a faith community. And here was a situation where he needed to be on the stretcher. He couldn't even walk alongside it. He needed to be carried. And that's what Calvi did. And I will go back and tell you that in the book I share that our pastor had cancer. And so halfway along my role with him, we learned of his cancer. And the stretcher metaphor came about in so many ways. And we used it with Charles because there were times as a pastor, he'd walked along it all the years of his ministry, and he really loved that. But when it was time for him to be on the stretcher, the church knew and understood, and Chuck knew the metaphor. And so it was a sacred time. And you're going to run into people throughout your congregations that need to be carried sometimes, and others need to be serving.
Mm.
So it's important to understand the distinction. But could I say a word about your stewardship or about
Of course.
stewardship in general?
Sure, of course.
Stewardship is much bigger than a stewardship campaign. It's much bigger than just dollars. It's many things. And certainly our dollars make a huge difference. But some people can't give dollars. And one of the churches I visited in Hawaii, Wayne Cordero's church, they were in a high school, a kind of a grungy high school. And I was so surprised when I drove up to it. But I walked into the, well, ladies' room, the girls' locker room. Flowers were everywhere, in the boys' bathroom, in the girls' bathroom, up in the front on the stage of this high school. And I asked Wayne about it afterwards. Where did all these beautiful flowers come from? He said, he gave me the name of the lady, and he said, that is their tithe to the church. They don't have extra money, but their 10% is that they provide flowers every Sunday. So there's many ways of being stewards. But the other thing I want to say is that the more you're involved, the more you care about the ministry, the greater you're giving. When Bob and I joined the church with 3 little kids, we didn't have the money to tithe and didn't even think about that in the beginning. But the more active we became, the more involved we were, the more service we gave, and the service we received. Our pledge went up and up and up. And it's not just me. I think you will see this with so many families in your church. So broaden your horizon about stewardship.
Thank you, Sue. I think just in the interest of time, the story about the book is about equipping church and how to become an effective church, equipping people, lay people, pastors working together. Everyone plays an important part. One of the stories I really liked, I think everyone on the team liked, was about Gordon and Jim Martin. It really shows how when people work together well, kind of the fruits that come from that. Can you please share us about that story?
I will, and I want to use the term high capacity and not so much in terms of people's eyes. Gordon Treherne was in the choir. He was a lawyer, but he had the gift of hospitality. And every Sunday he would notice, because he sat up front, our choir did, who was new, and he was always out there. But he saw this young man riding back and forth in front of the patio Sunday after Sunday. And so finally one day he walked down and said hi, and then Jim said hi and kept on going. The next weekend, Gordon was out there again and invited him into the church. And he said, oh, I'm not dressed right because I had a helmet on and he had shorts on. He said, no, you're dressed just fine. Come on in. Long story, Gordon introduced him to me, handed him off to me. And I showed him, I gave him a little tour of the church, and I said, here's my office. If you ever want to talk or if you ever need any help, please come to my office. He came frequently. They were special, wonderful visits. And we learned that he really wanted to be a part of the church. He came to the new member class. He explained in the class that he was a grand mal epileptic. That's why he wore the helmet. And he spoke in this very low, slow manner. And so people didn't think he was all that bright, perhaps. I don't know. But he came to my office and he said, I really want to be a leader. I said, what does that mean to you, Jim, to be a leader? He said, I want to be in charge of something that takes care of people, that serves people. Well, I was really taken by that. And we talked about it. And I eventually nominated him to be a deacon. And the deacons called me and said, why on earth are you nominating Jim? And I explained why. And he wanted to be in charge of the food pantry and of providing transportation because he couldn't drive. He was an epileptic. So he knew the importance of people getting rides back and forth. And he wanted to go. We have a Mexico war camp every year. He wanted to go and he said, I'm so disappointed that I can't go on this. I said, why can't you? He said, my doctor won't allow it. It's not safe for me to do that. I said, well, there are other ways you can contribute. You know, they go through a lot of food. They're down there for a week. You could go work in the kitchen and help prepare the food. He said, I have an idea. I said, okay. He said, I make really good chocolate chip cookies. I said, well, on a work camp, everybody loves a chocolate chip cookie. Trust me. 3 days later, when the trip was getting to, Jim arrives at the church with 100 dozen chocolate chip cookies that he made in his kitchen. The church was just blown away. And that became the beginning of what I call the chocolate chip ministry, because he was there at staff retreats. He would provide extra cookies and so forth. Anyway, he was called to be a deacon. We were scheduled to do an officer training. He was so excited to come to the training. I had to call and postpone the first one. My mother, this was also during the time when Joe was sick, and my mother was gravely ill. And I said, I apologized. I said, we will do it. I just can't do it this week. And then 1 week went to 2. And on the last week before my mother died, I was away from the church all week. She died the weekend of Thanksgiving, and it was announced in church that Sunday. Monday, I went back to work, and I went in very early. The church was empty. The building was empty, to try and get my head around what we had to do. And I turned on my light, was trying to move some of the piles around, and I pulled out my chair to sit down. And on the chair was a batch of warm chocolate chip cookies. And I wept. I just sat there and wept. Jim was a deacon in the Christ sense of the word. He knew how to love people. He knew how to care for people. And it mattered. It mattered deeply to me. And so that was the beginning of this deep relationship with Jim Martin. And then he came one night and said, your office is a mess. You've got too many files and not enough shelves. I said, I know, but I don't have a budget for shelves. He said, do you have a budget for wood? I said, I could get some. My husband could get me some. He said, if you get some wood, I'll build you shelves for your office. But I can't do it until next week. I said, oh, that would be wonderful. What's happening? He said, I'm going on a trip. Where are you going, Jim? He said, I'm going to Yosemite. I want to see that great big rock. I said, you mean Half Dome? He said, yes. I've heard about it all my life and I want to go see it. So I said, have a wonderful time. And I have the wood here on Monday morning. I will look forward to seeing you. That was my last conversation with Jim. He died on a trail in Yosemite. Apparently the altitude triggered a seizure, but he died happy. He died doing what he wanted to do. And the church was overwhelmed with grief when he died. His funeral was filled to the nines. I mean, the church was packed. But the last gift that Jim gave was beyond what he did in the church. He considered Brentwood his family. And about a month later, the administrator came into a staff meeting with tears running down her face. And it was a check from an insurance company, because he had taken out life insurance on himself and he made the church the beneficiary. And that money went towards creating the Jim Martin Memorial Prayer Garden on our campus. But he's the story of transformation. Not only his, but he transformed the hearts of all the people that he came in contact with. Gordon was this high capacity, great lawyer who loved to meet people. Jim was this quiet, didn't look like a servant, always wore a helmet 24 hours a day for protection, whose life was transformed, whose other lives were transformed by his participation in the church. There are stories beyond that, deep and wide, that not only touch your heart, but show the value of being asked, being invited into ministry, being equipped to serve in ministry, being discovered your needs as well as your gifts. So it's a two-way street. It's about serving and being served. But what I took away from Jim and others like Jim, Bruce Johnson, for example, who helped with the computer, is God does unbelievably calls the unqualified to be mirrors of us, of what can accomplish in his church, because God is the equiper of these people.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a beautiful story. So if people have questions about Equipping Church, you're welcome to submit them to Pastor Steve and I, but I'll keep going as long as we have time. I really like the part of the book on equipping. There's where it says, the underlying and critical foundation for everything we do in area of equipping people must be the goal to set them up to succeed. And then there's a quote from Mike Slaughter, the pastor of Ginghamsburg Church.
Ginghamsburg, right.
Yeah, thank you, who said, this is my mission statement, to connect people to their God destiny. That's why we exist, to help people discover their own burning bush, and then we throw gasoline on that burning bush. What are ways people can be equipped to succeed? And then what are ways to throw gasoline on that burning bush to serve joyfully?
There are many ways to equip people to serve. And you've heard that in this story. One of the things that we've tended to do in the church is pigeonhole people when we're inviting them into ministry. So I'm going to combine two things. We had a stewardship campaign, as long as we're talking stewardship, and we invited a gentleman to serve on the committee who was a primary fundraiser for the Republican Party in California. I knew him personally because we were neighbors, and so we drove back and forth to church together. We were planning a big stewardship dinner. So we're driving home from this meeting, and Steve was really annoyed. I said, what's the matter? He said, why is it they always ask me to raise money? I do that for a living. I don't want to do it for the church. I said, well, what would you like to do? He said, I'd like to take over the dinner. I'm a cook. I love to cook. So what we did is his burning bush was coming to the church to cook, believe it or not. We just poured gasoline all over that. And Steve went on to thrive. He did the dinner for 250 people, I might add. And he went on to lead all the men's ministry and prepare for all the men's ministry breakfast. So we poured fuel onto his fire and he took off. And there's so many stories like that. You just have to find people doing something they love and either equip them or invite them into it.
Thank you. There's a segue I'd like. Years ago, TUC made a decision to discontinue having an assimilation team with an elder. And I wanted to ask, because a lot of what the book is about, you talk about the importance of finding people at the right time, the right role. So how important is assimilation in the church, and what have you seen that works for assimilating people in the church?
Okay, I think that wrap it in a bigger picture. It's assimilation and discovery. It's connecting. Change the word if assimilation's getting in the way. How do you connect with the people that come through your doors? How do you learn about them? How do you connect them to other people? I mean, you are a unique church with people coming from all over the world. I mean, you're an expat church in many ways, as well as the Japanese culture. How do you help people connect? How do you learn about these people? How do you learn about their gifts? How do you learn about their needs? Without some intentional discovery and assimilation, a way to connect, you're missing so much of so many people. And so I really think that would something to be reconsidered, but maybe on a broader scale. How do we look at the bigger picture of connecting, discovery, getting to know our people?
And that's a bit about the book. It talks about people who fill in a form, which we just went through. People filled in a form. Where would they like? Where's their passion to serve next year? But it's interesting. There's a story about I think his name was Russell.
Russell Johnson.
He was chronically gifted,
Yes,
and he was in his 80s. And then he made an impact on many people over many years of serving at the church. But when they asked him how he got started, he said, "I've never volunteered." It was people who reached out to him. So what are effective ways to connect people into the right cause?
This man, he was an elder. He was serving he was my lay ministry elder, and he was indeed chronologically gifted. But, you know, there's something to be said for those of us who are chronologically gifted. I'm moving into that era myself. But people need to be asked. They need to be invited into ministry. And if you don't know who they are, how can you ask them in? Too many people sit in the pews waiting to be asked, waiting to meet somebody, waiting to be able to do something. And a blanket, y'all come, oh, we want you to sign up. That's not so great. But if you're having them fill out a form, your responsibility as a church is to follow up on every check mark on that form. That's where the ball gets dropped. People fill out a form and then nobody ever calls them. And therein lies the problem. And so you could call that assimilation, you can call it connecting, you can call it bad ministry. Because if I check mark that I want to do something in your church and you don't call me, shame on the church. Because if you don't call me, I think you don't want me or you don't need what I have to offer.
Mm-mm. Yeah. Yes. The ball's in our court.
All is in your court.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another quote that really got us talking. It's the book, it refers to, the church by definition is the greatest gathering of potential servants in the world, but she is also the most notorious vehicle for disappointing, discouraging, and even destroying them. And then there's another point when it says, during one of the seminars hosted by the Church Growth Institute, one of the presenters made an offhand and certainly unexpected comment in which he noted that the largest percentage of members leaving churches were former elders and deacons. I was stunned. How can churches avoid disappointing and discouraging people? And how can churches prevent members from leaving unnecessarily?
By recognizing them, by affirming the time they're giving, not just their dollars. We say thank you for the stewardship of dollars, but are we saying thank you for every gift of service? And we underdo that. Most churches thank people for Sunday school teachers, but beyond that, everybody else is still doing a whole lot of wonderful stuff inside and outside the walls of the church. So that church growth thing really opened my eyes. We called together all of our former elders and deacons. We looked on the roster to see if they were there. Many had left. We hosted a dinner at my house, intentionally not at the church, and invited them to come, and we listened. And we were wounded, rightfully so, but we deserved it. They said, you know, they felt they worked their hearts out, they were used up, and then just dismissed when their term was over. They didn't get thanked. They didn't get some training. Some of them went into it saying, I felt kind of stupid because I didn't know I know how to do my job at work. I don't know how it works in the church. And so we undervalued them, we undertrained them, we underaffirmed them, and we underthanked them. And so it was like a giant exit interview. P.S. We started doing exit interviews with all of our leaders that were leaving service to learn, what did we do well? What could we do better? What was the best part of your service? What was the most challenging part? I mean, you can make up your own questions, but it's validating that they did something for you, and we want to say thank you. An exit interview is a way of saying thank you as well. But we learned so much from that gathering, and they began to come back to church. A lot of people had left because they felt used up and burned out.
Thank you. One question is, you know, some people have served at the church for many years. They understand what their role is, but in the equipping church, you're going somewhere new. You're going in a strategic plan, and you're working together to fulfill a certain vision. How important is training when it comes to equipping people, even seasoned leaders? Do they need training?
The answer is yes, because they may be high capacity, seasoned people, but they don't know exactly what it is you're asking them to do. And some of it is about protocol in the church. That was another one of my come to Jesus moments with Charles. I thought they needed training, and my job was to help, not tell them what to do, but to prepare them for the ministry they were called to. He said, oh, they're so busy, we can't ask them for any more time. I said, Charles, we need to do this. We need to do this. We need to help the elders succeed. Again, we need to set them up to succeed. And I had fresh in my mind the exit interview from the former elders. So he didn't support it. I said, "Will you come?" He said, "No, I don't think it's a good idea, sir." And so this was one of those moments I went ahead and did it anyway.
Mm.
You know, it's sort of sin boldly and seek forgiveness later. And that's what I decided to do. And so we have
I-
18 elders and 15 showed up.
Mm.
And what I had done is I'd had a notebook for them with a church calendar, their job descriptions, their budgets, practical things. It wasn't all telling them how to do their job. And my pastor called the next day. God love him. I don't know too many people that are as generous as he is to say, "I guess I was wrong, wasn't I?"
Mm.
And he said people had called him to say, "What a wonder." He said one fella told him, "It took me 6 months to learn all this stuff the last time I served."
Mm.
And here it was in one night.
Yeah. And I remember in that story, there was that the pastor he didn't think people would show up to the training.
No,
And
not.
he didn't show up, and he was invited. And then not only did it end on time within 2 hours, but people stayed 45 minutes over because they wanted to talk more.
They had
to
more
get-
questions.
So
Yeah,
even seasoned people.
it was a lovely affirmation.
Yeah.
And it also was an affirmation of the value of leadership support and training. Call it what you will.
Yeah. I like that story. Okay, we have one question from the audience here. Brentwood Church, or in your experience at church, how do you support anyone at church who needs professional help for physical and mental health? Are there certain policies and procedures that support people who come and need that sort of support?
Well, it's an interesting question, and it depends on the degree. A lot of churches that I learned in my travels in the United States when we took the ministry national, a lot of churches have nurses. This was new to me. If it's a mental thing, then it's an issue that we have to really work carefully with the pastors to find a way to find the right help for that person. But then you look at people like Jim, who people thought needed help, and another person, again, who has cerebral palsy, and people dismissed him because he talked funny and he moved had uncontrollable movements. He was one of the brightest young men I have ever met, and he formed our second task force for computers because his profession, his sweet spot, was developing databases. So he worked with the church corporate across the United States, interviewing churches and interviewing companies. We had dismissed, a lot of people wouldn't have Matthew on their team any more than they would have Jim Martin. It's a comfort zone issue, but we learned the capabilities and the needs. And we tried to work around them if they wanted to be involved in ministry. The only caveat I would be is if there is an emotional issue, that's something above and beyond the call of lay people. The pastors would have to, I would seek help and advice from the pastor.
Okay, I see many more questions coming. On that point, in TUC, one of our pillars is open to all. And I know at Brentwood Church, you have the story about Robert, who wanted to sing in the choir and how he got started. Can you share how
Robert was homeless, okay? He had the voice of an angel. He wanted to sing in the choir. Part of the issue was the choir was reticent because he smelled so bad. And so it came up in staff to say, what do we do about that? And the idea that came out is get him some clean clothes and a place he can shower so that on Sunday he comes dressed. But the bigger story on that, because the church took him under their wing, Robert went on to come to my office with a proposal for a feeding program for his homeless, what he referred to as his brethren. And so I had him take it to the mission committee. He wore a Sunday outfit, took it to the mission committee, and they adopted it. So there was a perception that we couldn't get, he was homeless and he was uncomfortable to be around. And yet he was a child of God that had ideas about serving his other people that were on the street. He said, I don't want you to serve them here. We'll do it offsite, but we can make meals. You have a kitchen and we can cook. And so there's so many people that seem unqualified that are not.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're at time, but the people who submitted questions, if you can give me the names and we'll get answers and share them by email. I just want to be, we have 11 o'clock service starting soon, but I think we have to say thank you, Sue, for not just writing the book, but being with us. I can say I love your stories. I always love it when we talk. And the book does, there is a chapter and about, throughout the book there's many examples, but Sue actually looks at 3 churches in particular and how they became equipping churches, starting from here and going to here. And it's not overnight, it's over months, years.
It takes time. It takes time.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm wondering if TUC can be an example of one of the next editions of Sue's books. As
I love it. I love that he thinks I'm going to have another edition.
We would be the first non-US church to be that, so.
I would love to see that happen, and I would love to help you along the way if you decide to go down that path.
Great. Yeah, we just touched the tip of the iceberg, I think, in terms of the book, but I hope you got a flavor. I hope everyone got a flavor of what it's about. It really is relevant to everything we do individually and as a church.
It's about loving people enough to transform them in ministry and partner. It's about partnership, pastors and people.
Yeah, so thank you, Sue. And thank you also to everyone who came and submitted questions and to the hospitality team. I see many.
So sorry
people,
that my
refreshments
we had a power outage.
Yeah, we can't control everything, but but thank you very much. Maybe if everyone can give a warm. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you so much, Sue. We have been encouraging people to read this book. I hope now you'll be inspired to do that even more. It's filled with, you've heard what kind of storyteller Sue is. The book's full of wonderful, inspiring stories. It's hard to get a hard copy here in Japan, but you can get it instantly on Kindle if you read on Kindle, and it's much cheaper. It's well worth it. And what I would love for us to do is have more people read the book, gather our questions together, and have Sue come back again and join us. And I think you'd be willing to do that, Sue.
That would be my honor. That would be my honor.
Thank you so much, Sue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sue.